Looking back, maybe the red flags were there, fluttering softly in the periphery. But when you're wrapped up in the warmth of what feels like true love, you tend to dismiss anything that doesn't fit the perfect narrative you've built in your head. Landon and I met through mutual friends about 2 years ago, and the connection wasn't just instant, it was seismic. It was the kind of meeting that makes you believe in fate, destiny, all that cliché nonsense that suddenly feels profoundly real. He wasn't like the guys I usually dated, the artists with fleeting passions, the entrepreneurs with more ambition than follow-through. Landon was stable. He had a career he was proud of, a 5-year plan, and an apartment where the plants were actually alive. He remembered the name of my childhood dog after I mentioned it once. He'd text me good morning and actually mean it, not as a prelude to a late-night booty call. After a long string of men who treated relationships like a game of emotional chicken, Landon felt like coming home. He wanted to know me, my dreams, my fears, the silly stories from my college days. He listened. He didn't just wait for his turn to speak. He absorbed my words and would bring them up days later. It was intoxicating, being with someone who wanted to build a foundation, not just pitch a tent for a weekend of fun before disappearing at the first sign of rain. We were building something real, something I thought was indestructible. But here's where the fault line began to form, invisible at first. About 6 months in, during one of those deep, 3 a.m. conversations where the world melts away and you feel like you're the only two people alive, he asked about my dating history. It was a natural question, a milestone of intimacy. "So, who was lucky enough to date the amazing Alara before me?" he asked, his voice soft in the darkness of his bedroom. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. I ran a quick, messy calculation in my head. I thought about the men I had called my boyfriends, the ones who had met my parents or who I'd spent holidays with. The relationships that had weight, substance, and a defined ending. "I've had a few serious relationships before you," I said, tracing a pattern on his chest. 5, I think. It wasn't a lie. Not technically. I was thinking of relationships. I wasn't thinking of the casual hookups, the one-night entanglements, the messy situationships that filled the gaps between them. There's a universe of difference between dating someone and just being with someone. Those other experiences, they were emotional clutter. They didn't mean anything to me. So why would they matter to him? I was trying to give him the highlight reel, the version of my past that was relevant to us. I wasn't going to hand him a detailed inventory of every man I'd ever been physical with. That felt clinical, and frankly, a little vulgar. Besides, I could tell Landon was more traditional than the men I was used to. He had this quiet, old soul quality. I didn't want him to get the wrong impression, to paint a picture of who I used to be and plaster it over the woman I was now. People grow, they evolve. The Alara he met was ready for something stable and meaningful. I'd already done my exploring, my partying, my phase of making reckless decisions in dimly lit bars. I thought my commitment to him, my unwavering loyalty from the moment we became exclusive, was proof enough of that. Apparently, none of that mattered once the truth, or his version of it, came out. The real complication was that my past wasn't neatly tucked away in another city or a bygone era. Some of it was sitting right across from us at our favorite brewery on Friday nights. Gavin, Reese, and Silas were integral parts of our friend group. They were also 3 people I'd been with, casually and at different times, long before Landon was even in the picture. It was just physical, meaningless fun that burned out as quickly as it started. When Landon and I became a couple and we all started hanging out as a larger group, I figured the past could stay exactly where it belonged. I wasn't doing anything wrong now. I was completely, unequivocally faithful to Landon. But having that shared history made the group dynamic layered. There were inside jokes that predated Landon, shared memories he wasn't a part of. Sometimes, I'd catch myself being more playful with Gavin or Reese than I probably should have been, a familiar, easy banter that was second nature to me. But it was innocent. I've always been an outgoing, tactile person. I wasn't going to amputate parts of my personality just because my boyfriend might misinterpret a friendly touch on the arm. If anything, I thought it showed how mature we all were that men and women could have a physical history and still maintain a platonic friendship. Honestly, a small part of me found it kind of exciting. It was like I had this secret, this hidden layer of desirability. Here I was, the girl that all these guys had wanted at some point, and I had chosen Landon. I thought that should have made him feel special, not threatened. It was a testament to how much I wanted him, but instead of seeing it that way, he started seeing shadows where there was only light. It began subtly. I'd notice his gaze linger a little too long when I was laughing at one of Gavin's jokes. If Reese told a story, and I chimed in with, "Oh my god, I remember that," I'd feel a slight shift in the energy beside me. Landon started analyzing my interactions like a detective searching for clues. Nothing I was doing was inappropriate. I was just being myself. But my natural charisma, my social ease, suddenly felt like a liability. The most frustrating part was his silence. He never said, "Hey, it makes me uncomfortable when you're so touchy with Silas." Instead, he'd get quiet and moody on the car ride home. He'd make passive-aggressive comments like, "You and Gavin sure seem to have a lot to talk about tonight." "Yeah, we're friends, that's what friends do," I'd reply, exasperated. Somehow, me enjoying myself at a social gathering became a problem for him. I started feeling like I had to constantly monitor my own behavior, to dim my own light just to keep him from sulking. If I laughed too hard, I'd see him tense up. If I chose a seat next to anyone but him, he'd find a way to position himself between us. It was exhausting, trying to manage his insecurities, while also maintaining friendships that were important to me. He was making me feel guilty for having a life that existed before he entered it. Everything started to unravel at a house party. It was one of those loud, crowded summer nights where the air is thick with music and cheap beer. Gavin, who never knew his limit, had too much to drink and started holding court with a few guys, bragging about his past conquests. It was typical, pathetic guy talk. Unfortunately, my name came up. From what I heard later, it wasn't disrespectful, just a statement of fact. A drunken tally of women he'd hooked up with back in the day. The problem wasn't Gavin's big mouth. The problem was that someone who knew both me and Landon overheard it. And instead of minding their own damn business, this person decided they had a moral obligation to spread gossip. The news got to me through a friend who thought I deserved a heads up. My first instinct wasn't honesty. It was damage control. I could already see how this would look to Landon, how he would twist this piece of ancient history into evidence of some present-day betrayal. Gavin talking about something that happened years ago wasn't my fault, but I knew Landon wouldn't see it that way. He would make it about him. He would create drama over nothing. So I decided to get ahead of it. Not by talking to Landon, but by talking to Gavin. I found him nursing a hangover the next day and confronted him about his inability to keep his mouth shut. He was immediately defensive, acting like I was overreacting. "Come on, Alara, it was just harmless guy talk," he slurred, rubbing his temples. "Everyone knows we have history anyway." "No, Gavin, everyone doesn't know," I hissed, my voice low and urgent. "Landon doesn't know. And you broadcasting it to half the city is going to cause huge problems for me. My relationship is at stake here." That's when he got that self-righteous look on his face. "Well, maybe you should just tell him the truth yourself, before he hears it from someone else." Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one who'd have to navigate the emotional minefield of a jealous boyfriend who couldn't handle his girlfriend having experience. "Some things are better left in the past, Gavin," I said, trying to make him understand. "Telling him about every single meaningless hookup won't help anyone. It will just hurt him and make things weird for the entire group, all for nothing." But he kept pushing his noble honesty agenda, as if he were some relationship guru. I finally had to spell it out for him. "If you actually care about my happiness, you'll drop this and be more careful about what you say. If Landon finds out and decides to make a scene, it won't just affect me. It'll make things awkward for everyone." I reminded him that if our friend group shattered, it would be on his head. That finally seemed to shut him up. My conversation with Gavin might have plugged one leak, but the dam was already cracking. Around the same time, Landon started asking more pointed questions. They weren't direct accusations, but loaded inquiries that felt like traps. "How long have you and Reese known each other?" he'd ask while we were making dinner. "Did you ever date anyone else in our circle before me?" I answered as vaguely as possible, keeping the details fuzzy. I told him when I'd met everyone, but glossed over the nature of our relationships. I didn't see how the specifics could possibly help. They were just ammunition he could use against me later. The situation finally exploded at a bonfire a few weeks later. We were all sitting around the fire, and Hayden made some casual reference to a camping trip from years ago, before Landon was around. It wasn't a big deal, just an inside joke about me, and a disastrous attempt at pitching a tent. But it was the casual intimacy of the memory, the obvious implication that we'd spent time together outside of group settings, that did it. I saw Landon's expression change. It was a flicker, barely perceptible, but I saw it. It was the look of puzzle pieces clicking into place in his head. The car ride home was dead silent. The moment we walked through the door of our apartment, he confronted me. For the first time, there was no passive aggression, no moody silence, just cold, direct inquiry. Is there something you need to tell me, Alara? About your relationships with our friends? The way he said it, I knew he already knew. Or at least, he suspected enough that any more evasion would be pointless. I had to be strategic. My first move was to minimize. Look, I started, forcing a calm I didn't feel. I might have hooked up with one or two of the guys, a long, long time ago, before you and I were even a thought. It's ancient history, Landon. It has no bearing on us. That wasn't enough, he kept pressing. Who, when, how many times? The questions felt invasive, like an interrogation. He was trying to build a case against my character. Why does that matter? I shot back, my voice starting to rise. It was before I even knew you existed. Why are you so obsessed with this? That's when I realized he wasn't looking for understanding. He was looking for a reason to be angry, for evidence to confirm the ugly suspicions he'd already formed. So I flipped the script. You know what this is about? I said, my eyes welling with tears, real tears of frustration and fear. This is about your insecurity. I can't believe you're so focused on my past when we have something so good right now. I let a sob escape. This is why it's so hard for me to be vulnerable about my past. Because I get judged. I shared what I was comfortable sharing, and you pushing for more is exactly the kind of behavior that makes me shut down. I reminded him that I had chosen to be with him, that I was with him every night, that he should feel secure in that. But he just stood there, his face like stone, refusing to take the bait. My emotional appeals, my attempts to make him the villain for being upset, they were bouncing right off him. When the tears didn't work, I finally broke. Fine, you want to know? Yes. I hooked up with Gavin and Reese and Silas. At different points, years ago, before we got together. The words tumbled out, sharp and angry. But they were meaningless physical encounters. No emotional significance whatsoever. And my number wasn't 5. It was higher. Significantly higher. I simplified things because I was trying to protect your feelings, Landon. I was trying not to overwhelm you with irrelevant details that would only hurt you. I braced myself for a fight, for yelling, for slammed doors. Instead, I got something much worse. He just went completely silent. Scary silent. He didn't argue. He didn't rage. He just sat on the edge of the bed, processing it all with a blank expression I couldn't read. I would have preferred his anger. At least then, I would have known what I was dealing with. This quiet, complete withdrawal was a territory I had never navigated with a man before. The weeks that followed were a form of psychological torture. I watched him emotionally check out of our relationship brick by brick. He wasn't cruel or vindictive. He was just gone. He was a polite roommate who shared my bed. The good morning texts stopped. The spontaneous hugs disappeared. I could feel him looking at me sometimes. And it wasn't with anger, but with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. It made my stomach clench, even though I knew I hadn't actually done anything wrong in the context of our relationship. I tried everything to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I planned a surprise weekend trip to the coast. I cooked his favorite steak dinner. I even tearfully offered to stop hanging out with the guys if that's what he needed to feel secure. But nothing worked. The fundamental dynamic had shifted. He was looking at me through a new lens, and he didn't like the person he saw. The worst part was how he started calling out my behavior in ways no one ever had. When I tried my usual strategies for conflict, getting emotional, bringing up past trauma, making him feel guilty for hurting my feelings, he wouldn't engage. He'd calmly say, I understand that you're upset, Alara, but that doesn't change the fact that you lied to me. He'd redirect the conversation back to the actual issue, refusing to get sidetracked by my pain. He started setting boundaries I'd never encountered. When I'd try to deflect, he'd firmly bring the conversation back. When I'd try to make him the villain, he'd refuse to accept the role. It was like he was reading from a script on how to handle emotional manipulation, and it made me feel completely powerless. I could tell he was planning to leave, but he was taking his time, detaching methodically. It was excruciating. I felt like I was living on borrowed time. In my desperation, I cycled through every strategy I'd ever used to keep a man interested. I'd be extra affectionate one day, cool and distant the next. I'd bring up our best memories, then hint that maybe we needed a break, hoping the threat of losing me would snap him back to his senses. But none of it worked. He'd already left me emotionally. The physical departure was just a formality. The end came on a Tuesday night, in the most anticlimactic way possible. He sat me down on the sofa, the one we'd picked out together, and told me in a calm, matter-of-fact voice that he couldn't be with someone who would lie about fundamental things, and then manipulate him when caught. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even sad. He was just stating a fact, like he was discussing the weather. The finality in his tone made me panic. This is the embarrassing part. I literally got on my knees. I begged him to stay. I promised I would change, swore the lies were a one-time mistake, offered to do anything he wanted. I told him how much I loved him, how perfect we were together, how stupid it would be to throw away our future over something that happened before we were exclusive. But even as I begged, I wasn't really taking responsibility. My pleas were all about what I needed, about how good we were, not about the pain my choices had caused him. When begging didn't work, something inside me snapped. The desperation curdled into rage. "You're making a huge mistake," I spat, getting to my feet. "You will never find anyone who loves you as much as I do." I had plenty of options, Landon. I could have been with Gavin or any of those other guys, but I picked you. The more he stayed calm, the angrier I got. I started questioning his masculinity. What kind of man can't handle his girlfriend having a past? Your insecurity is pathetic. I started dredging up every little mistake he'd ever made, every flaw I'd stored away, and I threw them at him like stones. He didn't even flinch. He just watched me, his expression full of a sad, resigned pity. Within 2 weeks, he had moved out. No drama, no big scene. He just quietly extracted himself from my life. If I thought the breakup was the worst part, I was wrong. In the months that followed, my entire social world crumbled. The friend group didn't excommunicate me all at once. It was a gradual freezing out. First, I noticed I wasn't being included in the group chat for weekend plans. Then, I'd see photos on Instagram from gatherings I hadn't been invited to. Gavin, Reese, and Silas started acting incredibly awkward around me. They'd make excuses when I tried to make plans. I realized with a sickening jolt that they felt guilty about their role in the breakup, and avoiding me was easier than dealing with it. What hurt most was that they clearly felt worse about disappointing Landon than about abandoning me, even though I'd known them for years longer. Their loyalty, it turned out, was to the boys' club. As the story spread, it got twisted. I was no longer the girl who'd had some casual fun before settling down. I was a manipulative liar who had deceived a poor, innocent guy. People who barely knew the details started treating me like a villain, whispering when I entered a room. Through the grapevine, I heard how well Landon was doing. He'd gotten a promotion. He seemed happier, lighter. People talked about him as if he'd been freed from some heavy burden, as if our relationship had been holding him back. It was infuriating. I had been nothing but supportive of him. But somehow, the narrative had become that I was the toxic one. The final blow came 6 months after the breakup, at a mutual friend's wedding. I saw him across the reception hall. And he wasn't alone. He was with a woman, and the moment I saw them together, I knew it wasn't casual. The way she looked at him, the easy way he rested his hand, on the small of her back, it was real. Her name was Clara. She was everything I wasn't. Quiet where I was loud, reserved where I was passionate. She was pretty in a simple, unassuming way. Our mutual friends, the same ones who now barely made eye contact with me, embraced her. They laughed at her quiet jokes and treated her with a warmth they had withdrawn from me. She fit into their world effortlessly, in a way that made me realize how much work I had always put into maintaining my own social position. People who had known me for years seemed more comfortable with her after one evening than they had ever been with me. So here I am, trying to understand how protecting someone's feelings somehow made me the villain in everyone's story. I've had to rebuild my social life from scratch, but the new connections feel shallow compared to the deep roots I thought I had. I still believe Landon overreacted. If he'd been more secure in himself and in us, none of this would have mattered. He let his traditional ideas about women and his own fragile ego destroy something beautiful. I genuinely loved him. But love, apparently, isn't enough when you're with someone who can't accept that adults have histories. I tried to shield us both from unnecessary drama and ended up losing everything. But the more time passes, the angrier I get about how I was treated. A man worth being with would have looked at what we had and decided that my past was irrelevant. But Landon was just looking for an excuse to run when things required actual commitment. Our so-called friends turned their backs the second it became inconvenient. Colton, Hayden, and John threw me away because they felt awkward about ancient history. They'd rather preserve their precious boys' club than stand by a friend. Everyone acted like Landon was this innocent victim when he was the one who couldn't handle being with an adult woman with experiences. He wanted some perfect princess with no past, no complications, no history that might challenge his worldview. Well, he found her. Some boring girl named Clara who probably thinks holding hands is an adventure. Good luck to them in their sanitized existence. I see now that I was trying to force myself into a life that was too small for me. Landon needed someone simple and unthreatening. That was never going to be me. The friends who abandoned me revealed how conditional their loyalty was. The social circle that rejected me can keep their judgmental bubble. I'm finding my people now. People who understand that life is messy, and that doesn't make someone a bad person. I'm dating men who appreciate my experience instead of being threatened by it. I'm building friendships based on actual acceptance, not on maintaining some fake perfect image. They can all keep their perfect little world. I'll take reality over their fantasy any day.